few minutes late, but we're delighted with the turnout, and we brought in some extra chairs for some latecomers who we anticipate. A couple of housekeeping things. First off, my name is Nick Fogel, and I have the pleasure of serving as president of the Jewish Children's Home of Rochester Scholarship Fund, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. And tonight you will have an opportunity after the program. These walls to the right of us will magically disappear. Another room will open up, and you'll have a chance to purchase Howard Goldstein's book, and also to meet him, and we'll have a chance to socialize and to ask him questions which we may not have time for as we go through the program this evening. Permit me at this time to introduce to you people who are here and will be participating. First off, we have a one-person truth squad here tonight in the person of Phil Nussbaum, and he needs no other introduction than that, and he'll tell you a little bit more about himself as we go through the panel discussion later on. But our program is going to be in two parts. First of all, we're going to have a presentation by the author, and then we'll have a panel discussion in which the other three, and I'll sort of keep score and act as the coordinator, traffic cop. For those of you who are old enough, I'll be the poor man, Saul Linowitz. But tonight we have a real treat, because we're going to hear from the author of A Home on Gorham Street. Our author has an international background. He was born a few years ago in Ontario, Canada. His wife Linda is here with him tonight, and I had the pleasure of talking with her at length over dinner. And she's the director of corporate and foundation relations at Colby College, and I'm going into competition with her on July 1st when I go to work for RIT. You can always tell where people's priorities are, because right after he mentions his wife and his curriculum vitae, he refers to his offspring of 4 daughters and 1 son who is here with us tonight, and 6 grandchildren, and very important also, a dog by the name of Sadie. His education was here in Rochester, New York at number 20 school, and then on to Washington Junior and Senior High School, graduating in 1940. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Southern California in 1950, and at that same institution received his Master's in Social Work and his doctorate in the years 1952 and 1970, respectively. Howard resided in Rochester from 1924 to 1943. His parents owned the Gorham Street Sample Shoe Store across the street from the Jewish Children's Home. For more historical perspective, you should note that his bar mitzvah was held at the Alfred Hart Synagogue, and he was a member of the Children's Home Boy Scout Troop 93. And his brother Herb, who is here with us this evening, joined us, and he was the scoutmaster. From 1940 to 1943, through the National Youth Authority, he trained to be a medical photographer at the Strong Memorial Hospital. During World War II, he was a combat photographer and was at the invasion of the Philippines and the occupation of Japan, and perhaps he'll tell us a little bit about General MacArthur. His employment from 1952 to 1970 was in social work and family agencies and private practice involving children and families. He has served as an assistant professor of the School of Social Work at San Diego State College. He's been a professor of the School of Social Work at the University of South Carolina. He's been a professor at the Maritime School of the Southwest in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He was professor in the School of Applied Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. And he has been a visiting professor back a decade or so ago at the University of Stockholm. He's previously published 3 professional texts, and he's written numerous articles. I think they number close to 40. He's currently, as he describes it, living on the edge of a lake in central Maine, 75 miles from the nearest shopping mall, and he's working on another book. It's a pleasure to introduce to you Howard Goldstein.
I'm really impressed with that introduction. I pulled out some material that I had before coming here to kind of refresh my memory, and I found my old 1940 yearbook from Washington High School, which I could barely find myself in it, except for one picture, and my name was spelled wrong. I talked with Jack Colvin today, and he guaranteed or assured me that at that time I was probably least likely to succeed. This is really incredible. I mean, I can't tell you what it's like to be back here and to see faces that I've not seen for so many years, 53 years to be exact. That I'd like to say everybody looks the same as they did, but we don't. But to see everybody is really remarkable. I have a tough audience tonight. It's really, I face all kinds of audiences, but I got a real tough one tonight. And that's because I got my grandson, Daniel, with my book in his hand, and he's my greatest critic, and he's keeping his eye on me. And as I introduce him, let me introduce my other grandchild, Jennifer. Please stand up. Her father, my son, her father, and my son, James, and Susan. My brother, who I have to say really, by no obligation, but it's really true, this book wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for him, and Marjorie. And never last, and certainly not least, my loving wife, Linda. But there are people who are not here that I miss, and one of the reasons that I wanted to do this was to find some way of coming back and finding old friends. These were conspirators of all kinds, skipping school, raising every kind of critter anybody can imagine, turtles, pigeons, white rats. I was looking for Arnie Barsman, who's gone, Haskell Hollander, who is gone, Mike Jaffe, who is gone, Louis Maris, and Manny Zeitler. All of them were my closest friends, my dearest friends. And then I miss those who participated in this book, who were part of the study, but never lived to see its completion. One was Joey Avnet, Ruth Clifford Edmonds, though I've heard from her sister, from her daughter, Jean Brenner, and we've started a lovely correspondence. Sue Rollick Hanlon, and Stan Goldblatt, who was really one of the first people I talked with. At that time I was living in Cleveland, and I got a call one day while I was teaching at Case Western Reserve, and a voice on the other end said, "Hey, are you the Howie Goldstein who lived in a shoe store and had a dog named Mitzi who could understand Yiddish?" And I said, "Stan." And Stan lived just down the street from where I lived, and we were able to spend some time together before he passed on. A famous book was written in 1940 that you've heard about called You Can't Go Home Again by Thomas Wolfe. And I found that to be only partially true. You can't go back to things. Things disappear, they get lost, they wear out. You can't go back to places. And the best example is that Gorham Street is gone. and my home is gone. The character of places change. You can go back to people if you're lucky, if they're still alive, and if they are alive, if they remember who you were. But most fortunate, or once most fortunate, if they could go back to community, and that's what I've come back to here tonight. The sense of culture, the sense of ideals, the sharing. It's not a place, it's not a thing, it's not anything that can be counted or measured, but it's a sense of something that I don't believe exists very much as it did in our time. It was a bond, and in our instance, it was Yiddishkeit that held us together. It always remained imprinted, the sense of being away. Years didn't make any difference at all. Being away didn't make any difference. Rochester, the Jewish community I grew up in, remained just imprinted on my soul. It was, I can't describe it. It's just something that is just there, that defies description. And it's funny how things begin. You never know how things are going to turn out when you start something. Herb and I, my brother and I, would bore people to death every time we got together over the years. And we lived in various parts of the country and in different countries. But we always talked about Gorham Street, and we always talked about the home, and we talked about the JY. And we were always asking, I wondered what happened to Gabby. I wondered what happened to High Jockey. I wondered what happened to Jack Weiland, and so on. And so as I came close to retirement, he and Linda and others encouraged me to try to do something with this, and I applied for a small grant with a small foundation at Case Western Reserve that gave seed money, a little money to get something started. And they provided enough for some transportation and getting the project underway. The first person I tried to find, I couldn't. Then Herb mentioned that he had seen Phil Newsbaum at a conference. And I got a hold of Phil, and Phil got a hold of Will, and from there it took its own life. I was merely going along with it, just riding with the project, letting it take me wherever it went, never believing that it would take me right here tonight, especially the night when my team is playing your team. I'm sorry. The book is about the kids of the home, but it's more than that. It's something I discovered almost immediately, that the kids were certainly important, but what really was the whole crucible in which everything grew was the community. Without the community, without the people, its religion, its beliefs, its customs, there wouldn't have been a home. And without the home, the community would have been at least just a little bit less. The fact that the board, since 1947, still meets, still is active, is an incredible tribute to the nature of community. So I want to read a few excerpts from the book that bear on the issue of community. And what I start with is with Will at the very beginning, because Will said it in a very brief sentence. He said, the neighborhood and the women who lived there. You know why I got this far? Because every time I saw Mrs. Kolko, she blessed me. A gesundheit dein Keppel. And the symbolism in that, I don't think I have to explain to you, but the women were always there, and so were the men. And now I don't like reading, but it's my book, so I can read it. With the passing of time, we may discover in our later years that the story of our lives and ourselves remain firmly anchored in the old relationships and places. Even as an outsider who grew up across the street from the Jewish Children's Home, I had been drawn into a peculiar pattern of institutional life, since many of the kids were my closest friends and companions. I was fortunate enough as a child to reap some of the benefits that were occasionally bestowed upon these, quote, orphans by benevolent community groups. Free movies, picnic, boat trips, parties. I was a Depression child. Parents during the Depression had very little to give. But as a child and an outsider, I could not know about the darker side of their asylum lives. Some imprint was undoubtedly felt, perhaps strong enough in my mind to put off chancing a trip to the old neighborhood. It's hard to go back again. You can't revisit the phantom world that a child once created, especially when the relics of that world no longer exist. The place isn't there, the street isn't there. Yet I remain curious. Over time, as I mentioned, talks with my older brother who had his own memories, and we wondered, did that difference really make a difference? Did the difference of those kids growing up there really make a difference? What happened to the kids? How did they fare? Did they make out okay in their post-institutional years? We talk about Gorham Street. I don't know how many of you remember Gorham Street. But I'm speaking of it as a neighborhood. That can be a sentimental term that arouses something stronger merely than mental snapshots of streets, buildings, stores, and playgrounds. Neighborhood, for us, was where we prevailed and where we belonged. And by definition, that everywhere outside our neighborhood was where we didn't belong. Nowadays, we dignify this quality of belonging with social science jargon that has edged its way into our language, calling it identity or reference group, for example. But insiders, the people who live in the neighborhood, in the community, don't need these kind of words. In my conversation with any of the former kids in the home, a word about Baden Street, or Nativ's Bakery, or the Lyric Theater, evoked a knowing nod that silently acknowledged, yes, I know, we were all part of it. The Jewish Children's Home was a conspicuous element of this immigrant community and neighborhood. Conversely, the spirit of the community spread into the lives and operations of the home. Each gave each other meaning and value, the community and the home itself. It was a neighborhood, a community of families, self-contained, hemmed in by other nationalities, and in turn surrounded by a white Protestant society that we kind of knew about, was out there, but never, people who had names like Robinson and Jones and Smith, who were foreign to us, so we were to them. Like other neighborhood streets, Gorham Street was also the site of some of the meager ventures in private enterprise by the few who did not work at the local clothing factories. Even then, who thought about zoning regulations? If it was possible to scrape out a living in some way, then Gorham Street was as good as any place to do it. There were little businesses and shops. There was a printer. Does anybody remember the name of the printer?
Alderman.
Alderman. That's right. A burlap bag company. Hoffman's. A garage. Herb? Huh? Different, that's right. And my father's shoe store, which was located in what would ordinarily have been a dining room and parlor of our second-story flat, identified only by the sign out in front. Its fading letters telling you that this was Gorham Street Sample Shoe Store. At the corner, anybody remember Mr. Berger? A chairless and silent man. And he and his wife ran the candy store from early morning to almost midnight, when transactions usually involved pennies for a piece of candy. My brother would get Maple Leaves 5 at a time and never share any with me. Mary Jane's. That's right. Or a cigarette. Next to him was the Italian tailor, a kosher poultry store with wooden coops of loudly squawking fowl, and a dark storefront that hid some kind of an Italian men's club. Does anyone remember the Colombian Society? I could never figure out whatever went on in the place. In retrospect, life both in the home and in the community was in a way tribal. You were born into it. It was part of you. You were part of it. Not only were you endowed with the customs and rules of Yiddishkeit from birth, and if a boy from the moment of circumcision, but from the outside your caste as a Jew, as others defined you, was never in doubt. If perchance you somehow forgot for a moment what tribe you belonged, even casual brushes with other nationalities, or more rarely, real Americans, would tell you where you didn't belong. Though he had achieved so many honors throughout his schooling and succeeded so well in life, Will laments the anguish that went with being an orphan in a public elementary school. As he puts it, the mental climate of the home followed us wherever we went. It was a price. At school, everyone knew who we were. The kids from the home got free cocoa or milk. Other kids had to pay 2 cents. We weren't given 2 cents to pay, so we couldn't be like everybody else. And I'm quoting him directly here. And there were some schmucky teachers. Then, just like now. Now, who's from the home and who can't pay for milk? Was the question. I don't think I've ever forgotten that. But being part of the tribe didn't necessarily mean that we always conformed to its customs. There's something wonderfully paradoxical about being a Jew. And in some way, I think it's captured in Fiddler on the Roof. You know? On one hand, the customs and laws of Orthodox Judaism appear to be so entirely unequivocal, absolute. On the other hand, they just beg for you to take a chance and break the law. The home's birth was a simple and specific expression of the immigrant Jewish community, about its shattered families and dependent children. It was not the result of a needs survey or a result of deliberation by a centralized planning body. The elders of the local community, Rabbi Sadowski, A.D. Jaffe, Ty Coco, William Markin, Alfred Hart, and others, simply determined that a shelter was needed, and with dedication and personal effort brought the home into being. Like other children's asylum grounded in the system of moral beliefs, whether secular or religious, the Jewish Children's Home was governed by its own paternalistic principles. Bound by the rigid framework of Orthodox Judaism and based on the Halakha, the laws of the Scriptures, the home's philosophy, program, and methods were firmly cast. At the center was the injunction for the child's respect for and obligation to parents or their surrogates. This imperative did not have to be spoken, articulated, or formalized as a policy statement. We knew it. It was as ingrained as understanding that food preparation would conform to religious dietary laws. And so from the outset, the ideology, culture, and rules of this institution were durably in place. The home's mission in providing shelter, sustenance, and education for its wards was simple and straightforward: to produce a good Jew and a good citizen, self-reliant and virtuous. Such bureaucratic trimmings as committee assignments and responsibilities, delegation of tasks, policy-making structures, and other complex systems that characterize modern social services were absent. The superintendent alone was in charge. To be sure, he was responsible to a board of directors whose membership rarely changed. But since patriarchs, at least men of this group, respected one another's authority, Mr. Hollander exercised his power unhindered and single-handedly. He was, as the kids put it, the boss. As has been amply shown, the rules and rituals and routines that he imposed, combined with the ability to pop up when he never was expected to be there, outlived many changes in child care during his tenure. Only the price of growing old restricted a few of his habits. In later years, the superintendent didn't even chaperone the children to the school or other events as he used to. To be sure, the home fulfilled its practical mission by providing a modest, if not somewhat bleak, shelter for dispossessed children of the community. Yet, in the absence of knowledge about what might have occurred otherwise, we do know that this endeavor created the opportunities for these youngsters eventually to return to their community as useful members of their own right. No matter what you think about the home or any institution, give thought to what would happen to the children if we didn't have it. For the most part, they took their place as responsible citizens who worked, married, raised families, and otherwise contributed to the well-being of their locality and city. Some became prominent professionals. Will and Phil, Ben Solon are good examples of alumni who entered the professions. There are many fragments from the past that tell us how much meaning the home had for other members of the surrounding community, for the people themselves. If it was not a community center, as this one is, as a formal organization, it was the center of my community and that of many other youngsters who lived nearby. There were no gates and no obvious restrictions to overcome. The home served as a playground, a social club, a place for religious observances, a source of entertainment, and in the modern day parlance, somewhere when one just could hang out with good friends. It even offered opportunities for outsiders to achieve certain rites of passages. And we referred to my bar mitzvah, the fact that my brother was a scoutmaster. Clearly the home did not have me or my brother or other neighbors in mind when the institution was conceived. That it just happened to be there, however, directly shaped and nurtured our childhood in profound and touching ways. There were other unintended but meaningful transformations that came about as a consequence of the home's existence. Successful businessmen turned out to be philanthropists, although I don't think any of them ever called themselves that. These citizens did not mark out sharp divisions between their business and their personal lives in their commitment to the home or other charities. Here's a brief passage from Alfred Hart's little telling book, Higher Ideals. Charity is not a duty. It is a privilege and an opportunity open to those anointed with the blessings of life. Let us keep charity and love in our hearts, not alone for those who are needy, but for every man, in every station of life, for every religious belief, and of every nationality. The Children's Home provided ordinary Jewish women of Rochester with the opportunities to enjoy an alternative to, and at the same time, their assigned role of being domestic, caring parents. The medium for such opportunities was the Mothers Club, founded in 1919 as a spontaneous and grassroots response to the need of the home's children. Adeline Rubenstein, recalling the leadership activities of her mother, Mrs. Brudno, observed, "These were all just common, ordinary wives of working men like my father, who was a house painter. In those days, women didn't work like today. There were the Perlmans and the Bitkers and the Kleinmans. They acted as mothers to the children. As close as these women were, they never called each other Becky or Elsie. It was always Mrs. Coco or Mrs. Perlman or Mrs. Kleinman or Mrs. Plaxton." Young adults also had their place in the stock of community folks who became aware of and responded to the plight of institutionalized children. No doubt the Jewish Big Brothers and Sisters Club provided a meeting ground for young men and women and the opportunity for social life, as it turned out, for courtship and marriage. Someday I'd like to do a study and see what happened to the kids and the Big Brothers and Sisters, who they married and what followed. But its major virtue was the kind of personal and organized services the club afforded the children. No one forgot the club's third Sunday, entertaining for children, the best show in town. The hard wooden folding chairs were noisily opened and set in rows in anticipation of a glorious afternoon's entertainment. Musicians, dancers, magicians, ventriloquists, Punch and Judy shows, game boats, bingo, WPA orchestra. Anybody ever hear WPA orchestra? Minstrel shows, and even, anybody remembers, Rabbit Moranville of the Boston Braves, and Indian Chief White Beaver, among those who came and entertained. There were also other clubs and organizations, the Alpine among them, that took something from, but gave much more back to the home. Beyond these formal organizations and auxiliaries, however, were ordinary citizens of the Jewish community, whose only connection with the home was in gifts and parties and treats. What people would do then, if a child recovered from surgery, or a daughter finally got married, or a child was born, was to send over ice cream, or to have a party for the kids. Did you people know where you were getting it from? I don't know, but there were always reports of someone sending over for the kids, some treat or another. The spirit of Yiddishkeit was the glue that joined these many forces into a vibrant folk culture. Whereas Judaism decreed the concrete laws, rules, and rituals of the setting, Yiddishkeit shaped the norms, the more generous customs varying on how or if such codes of conduct were carried out. On one hand, you could be a good religious Orthodox Jew, but being Yiddish, that told you how to be a Jew in relation to others. In Yiddishkeit could be found the comfortable metaphors, the comic ironies of daily life, the ingrained moral sense of obligation to one's comrades, playfulness, food had a great deal to do with it. Yiddishkeit itself did not make the institution good or bad, helpful or harmful. It represented, however, the ethos, the culture of this particular institution, the customs, manners, beliefs that shaped the home. The structure of the institution, its hard rules and procedures were one thing, but its culture, the informal way in how life gets worked out among its members, instilled a vitality, zest, humor, playfulness, ability to fight back, the ability for people to make healthy choices, the ability for people to discover their own strength and resilience. Let me conclude, if you could stop me. I tried to find out what it meant, of course. This was the purpose. And I think Phil here said it very simply in the letter that he wrote. Well, it's not that simple. But when it comes to life experiences, each individual decides within himself what their meanings are and how these experiences are going to affect them. If we are going to preserve our identity, we have to decide within ourselves what these experiences should mean. Will they cripple us, or will we gain greater strength that evolve from our own determination? Therefore, the home could hardly be the same environment for each of us who grew up there. I recorded my first insight into the importance of these stories, the opening chapters. I wrote the stories, the autobiographies that the graduates of the home shared with me so willingly destroy the psychological myth that we are destined to go on ever harvesting the fruits of seeds planted early in our lives. We are not forced to keep reliving our problems that we've had. We can rise beyond them. One of the former wards said, I had to make it. I had to be somebody. Another said it straight out. You have to be a mensch. And that, after all, captures the main and central purpose of group care for children, to make possible personhood, civility, citizenship, membership, and above all, menschkeit. Thank you.
We're very fortunate to have three distinguished panelists with us tonight. and I'm going to call upon them in the order in which they're sitting next to the author, and I'm going to give you the introductions now. I'm really not going to introduce Phil, because if you read the book, that will tell you a lot about him, albeit from a particular perspective, and I'll let him speak for himself. But he, like a number of people here, and like Will, spent their lives in social work and in counseling, and he'll share with you his own impressions, and we're going to have him back clean up here tonight. To start off with, however, it's always been a great honor and privilege for me to be in a position to introduce my good friend Michael Miller. I consider the fact that he's my good friend to be my highest accomplishment, but he's accomplished a few other things as well. He now serves as a Monroe County Family Court judge, and he's been in that office since 1990, and I think you'll find little disagreement in our community that he has set a new standard for superiority in terms of distinguished service in a very difficult setting, trying to handle the problems that come before that part of our judiciary. And we've had a lot of very distinguished people serve on that bench. He's a graduate, along with my mother, of Syracuse University, and he graduated from College of Law. Before going on the bench, he practiced for over a quarter of a century here in Rochester. He served as the only Democratic councilman in the town of Brighton for many years, and he really gave people such a sample of what Democrats could bring to public office that we're now blessed with very enlightened government in the town of Brighton. He saved me by succeeding me as chairman of the Monroe County Democratic Committee, and under his leadership we achieved success that was unparalleled in the history of politics in this community. And unfortunately for the Democrats, it turns out that the years that Michael and I were at the helm, people look back fondly as Camelot. He's authored numerous articles on local government. He's lectured and written extensively on the rights of disabled citizens. He's received a number of awards. For instance, in 1986, he received the Association of Retarded Citizens Community Partner of the Year Award. He was appointed to the Mayor's Commission on Violence in 1992 and chaired its Criminal Justice Task Force. A couple of years ago, in 1994, Judge Miller was named Citizen of the Year by the Brighton Rotary Club, which cited his work on behalf of the children of Monroe County. And just this year, he was awarded the Friend of Children citation by the Rochester Children's Collaborative. I'm proud to introduce my good friend, Michael Miller.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to follow Nick to a microphone. It seems that I've been following him all of my life. Nick graduated from Monroe High School, and I graduated from Monroe High School. He went on to become a lawyer. I went on to become a lawyer. He was the Monroe County Democratic Chairman. I succeeded him as Monroe County Democratic Chairman. He even dated my wife before I married him. But I do want to say a special word of mazel tov to Nick. As was mentioned earlier, on July 1st, he becomes the Vice President of Development and Public Affairs for the Rochester Institute of Technology, the 13th largest private educational institution in this country. And Nick, the Jewish community has a tremendous sense of pride in your accomplishment and in all that you have done for us, and I want to thank you for that. I read Howard Goldstein's book, and I was absolutely enthralled by it. It is an invaluable addition, not only for its sociological importance, but it's an invaluable addition to the history of the Rochester Jewish community. And I read those descriptions of Joseph Avenue, and I can remember so well as a young boy, my father taking me back to Joseph Avenue. You know, we were the Millers from the Millers Pop Shop on Thomas Street, of course. And we would always go back and visit the old family home on the Sundays. And then he'd take me up Joseph Avenue and we'd go to Cohen's Delicatessen. And of course there was an Italian grocer on the corner who was particularly friendly with our family, and he would delight in preparing the baskets for sukkahs that we used to take as offerings to the temple. And so it was a wonderful trip back. And it also gave me a sense of pride in the Rochester Jewish community. To think that the leaders of the community, the pillars of the community, the people who were most successful in our community, the Coco family, the Levinson family, the Hart family, the Rob Coco family, people who had made successes of themselves, still they were thinking of their own and their own Jewish community who needed help. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, the great philosopher and teacher, once said, "The mark of greatness of a people is how they take care of the least among us." And by that standard, the Jewish community of Rochester in those days was a great community. I remember the story when the first Jews came to this country. They came to New Amsterdam, and they had to ask permission from the then governor, Peter Stuyvesant, as to whether they could come in and live here. And he said, on one condition, you must take care of your own. And we have done that ever since. And I am very proud to be a part of that Jewish heritage. Just let me say a few words from my perspective as a family court judge about institutional care for children. Relate the story about the house on Gorham Street to today's circumstances. Let me say that as out of fashion as orphanages may be, there is no one answer to the problem of our destitute children that is absolutely right. Sometimes we who come from the liberal persuasion seem to think that we have a monopoly on the truth, and we disregard any countervailing theory. That arrogance was expressed when Vice President Quayle talked about family values and criticized the star of a television show for having a child out of wedlock. Well, time has proven that those values are important, that family is vitally important. I say it over and over again, the surest sign of success for a kid in trouble who comes before me in my court is to have two concerned parents there. But that is becoming rarer and rarer in our society. And it was the same thing when the Speaker of the House of Representatives early on suggested that maybe one answer to the problem of our abandoned and our neglected children was reinstitution of orphanages. Maybe we didn't like the messenger, and that's why we shunned the message. You know, the concept of an orphanage, the Oliver Twist, please can I have more, sir, and the slap on the hand and the laughter. That was the concept that we had of orphanages. But it is not altogether true, as Howard Goldstein has pointed out so admirably in his book. You know, in the physical sciences, for every action, there's a reaction. The social sciences, for every action, there's an overreaction. I mean, we were sold a bill of goods that said that the sole problem, the sole cause of family breakup is poverty. And if we can service every family and give them what they need, we can keep every single family together. And that's always best for the children. And it sounded good. And we bought into it with our laws, with our statutes, with our social services. The sad part was that it just isn't true. Poverty is not the main cause of family breakups today. The main cause of family breakups, 80% of the cases that come to my court involving abandoned and neglected children, is addiction to crack cocaine. I have a mother whose kids are starving, and this is not uncommon, because she's out there selling the food stamps for drugs. Comes to court, I take the children away. She goes off to a drug rehabilitation center. She comes back in 60 days with a certificate. She's completed it. I got to give her the children back. And you know what? Anybody can do well in a structured setting. It's when they come back to the community and that support system isn't there anymore that things break down. And 6 months later, she's back in court again. And the kids are starving again. And they're going to have to go back to foster care again. And the law says, Judge Miller, you've got to keep trying to put this family back together again. You know, we have got to get rid of these old myths. Sometimes a family setting is simply not best for a child. And a lot of times, institutional care can be the answer. It's better than shifting a kid from foster care family to foster care family to foster care family, keeping that child in limbo, not letting that child feel any permanency, and it wrecks their lives. I can't tell you how many of those kids come back to me as juvenile delinquents committing the most heinous crimes. One interesting thing. I send a kid to the Division for Youth, which is juvenile prison. The time that they have the most incidents, violent incidents, is in their last month when they know they have to go home again. As the DFY workers tell me, at least here, they know they've got a bed, they've got a degree of safety, they've got 3 meals a day, they know what the rules are, and they know what to expect. And they can survive in a situation like that. The thought of going back to the neighborhoods that they come from, to the families or lack of families, is so frightening to these kids that they commit these kinds of acts. The stories that Dr. Goldstein relates to us about successes of people who came out of these institutions and made something of themselves are absolutely astonishing, and they should be read by all the people in academia today who are saying that these institutions will not produce anything but a terrible life for a child. We have people sitting in this audience tonight who get the lie to that theory. The house on Gorham Street is a remarkable house. It was a remarkable institution. It had its good points. It had its bad points. But taken all together, it was something that was very desperately needed at that time, and I think could be looked at as an example for our present day problems. Thank you.
Dr. Rita P. Underberg is Clinical Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry and Psychology at the University of Rochester Medical Center. She joined the faculty of the Department of Psychiatry in 1966, following 10 years of service as a school psychologist with the Rochester schools. Currently, she is in private practice in Brighton, in addition to her clinical teaching at the medical center. She served as a director of training in clinical psychology for 6 years, following which time she was appointed as coordinator of training in parent education and parent counseling. Dr. Underberg works with children, parents, teachers, and other relevant adults in a child's life. She teaches these skills to professionals in advanced training programs. Trainees in psychology, psychiatry, social work, family medicine, pediatrics, and pediatric dentistry. And this is in her seminars in parent counseling at the Department of Psychiatry. She's a consultant to BOCES No. 2 and to the Greece Youth Bureau. She's also extended her work into the community. Accordingly, she's addressed and or given workshops to groups of parents, teachers, social workers, pediatric dentists, school bus drivers, educational administrators, judges, attorneys, child librarians, and a host of others who work with children in child-related areas. She's often quoted in national parenting magazines and child and family columns of newspapers and other publications throughout the country. Her comments have frequently appeared in Dr. Lawrence Kuttner's popular family column in the New York Times, and Dr. Underberg has authored numerous published articles and was a columnist for Rochesterian magazine, writing about mental health issues relevant to children and parents. The member of the Underberg family that I had the greatest contact with for many years was her husband, Stan, as a CPA. And they have 2 grown children, a daughter who's also a CPA, and a son who is an attorney. So it's my pleasure to call to the podium Dr. Rita P. Underberg.
The good news is that I did not break the chair. What happened was it fell into a break in the platform, so I'm not at fault for anything that is not elegant and classy. Now we'll continue, now that you know that. I have been fortunate to have had close contacts with 3 of the kids who spent some time growing up in the home. Lil Braveman, the dearest of all friends, who is giving and loyal. Phil Nussbaum, with whom I worked for 10 years in the city schools when I was a school psychologist. And Will Greenberg, then director of the Jewish Home for the Aged, when I was on the board of directors. All 3, in my experience with them, and very close to so many of these things that Professor Goldstein talked about in this book, all 3 were always giving, always loyal, always talented, and truly splendid human beings, just as was described in the book of other kids who grew up in the home. So I wanted to give that as a very special tribute before I shared some of my strange ideas with you. This book, admirably and coherently written, speaks to the phenomenon of Rashomon and that of resiliency, both of which I will briefly discuss shortly. The book integrates in a meaningful way the home as it fit within the context of the Jewish community of Rochester at that time. And by the way, that description was very close to my father's description of the Lower East Side, with all the smells and wonderful things that took place. So Jews do their eating every place. It is clear that the relative merits or demerits of placements of children in a familial home, a foster home, or in an institution cannot be viewed through a simplistic glass in terms of children's needs as they grow towards maturity. Simple explanations cannot do justice to complex organisms. For example, we are all aware of the emotional scarring imposed upon children who live in dysfunctional families, some of which the judge talked about just now. Yet even within that context, a resilient child can, despite such experiences, survive the deleterious effects of such an environment with a fair degree of personal integrity. maybe 1 out of 5 or 6. And I have had such people who are parents in my office to talk about wanting to avoid some of the horrors they grew up with. Child abuse, neglect, all the horror, drug abuse, the whole spiel. Rashomon is a play currently at the Shore Festival, but this is not going to be a critique. Currently at the Shore Festival that centers around the phenomenon of individualized and differing perceptions of the same event. Essentially, this concept states that people see what they want to see, and they say what they want to hear. Further, also for the play, everyone tells what they want the world to believe. That's one of the problems in doing interviewing. Are they saying what happened? Are they saying and describing what they thought was happening? Within this framework, facts are easily agreed on. There was a home. There was a head of the home. There was the boss. There were these experiences. Those are facts, easily agreed upon. However, the emotional interpretation and manipulation of the facts can often obscure the truth. It is very difficult to remove oneself from emotional connections to facts, to step outside our own personalities in the interests of objectivity. You could think of the O.J. trial. You could think of other kinds of descriptions and people who are witnesses in courts. Why do they differ so much? Differing views of the home on Gorham Street, as articulated by the former residents of that institution, could easily be understood as a function of Rashomon, which is a gate in Japan. With respect to the issue of resiliency, a reference to George Valiant in the book defines that work as the capacity to be bent without breaking and the capacity once bent to spring back. And so it was with the former residents who grew up to be interviewed by Professor Goldstein. Despite the autocratic climate, quoting from his book, of inflexibility, regimentation, and control, children dared to test, to challenge authority, to scheme, to outwit, and overcome the daily, dreary routine. A lot was said about Phil doing that kind of thing. I can tell you he did it at the city schools as well. And I helped him do it. Right? In my practice, I speak with adults who have survived many different kinds of horror stories. In many instances, their sibs have not survived as well. Accordingly, I do think, somewhat at variance to one of the concepts in the book, that it is not just an individual kind of thing, but it is also a social interaction of people taking care of each other and of belonging. But I do believe that in the wiring, and I've met so many people like that, it's the only thing that can come to mind when I meet with these survivors, that there is something within the child that is endowed by birth, thus contributing to the wonder of survival against overwhelming odds. Finally, I had some questions in mind that hopefully we can respond to from you, from the people on the panel, and so forth in the Q&A period. I wonder, do we have statistics? Maybe that could be answered. It's a simple question. I wonder how many children from the home use the scholarship funds for college, bearing in mind that a lot of people did not go to college then from outside the home. An intriguing question. How might the group of kids not consenting or not being found to be interviewed differ from those who did give interviews? Though, remember, people who come to see me are already highly selective. They already love their kids. They are already, many of them, guilt-ridden about not being to provide as much as they would like. They already want some answers. Rejecting parents wouldn't come near a person like me. Their notion is, do what you please as long as you don't bother me or interfere with what I want to do. So I wonder how those who didn't speak, those who did speak, were proud of what they had accomplished, proud that they were mentioned, very proud of their children, deservedly. What about those who didn't speak? What happened to them? And we probably can't answer that, but it's an intriguing notion. And finally, I wonder if there were any more than a few lasting friendships among the kids in the home by the time they reached adulthood. Obviously, there were some. Phil and Will are some of those. But were there lasting friendships? Like, remember, in our own families, sometimes we like them and sometimes we don't. And I guess a few of you have memories like that. So with that, I hope we'll have much more to say to each other during Q&A, and I am extremely honored to have been asked to serve on this panel.
It's indeed an awesome responsibility to call on anyone to speak for the residents of the Jewish Children's Home, but in selecting Phil Nussbaum, it was a nomination by acclamation, and the nomination was made by Will Greenberg, and it was a close vote, but it was unanimous nonetheless. And if you want to find out more about Phil Nussbaum, you're going to have to read the book, and there are many pages, and you'll see his imprint on the fine authorship of Dr. Goldstein. It's my honor to introduce to you Phil Nussbaum.
This is not a very easy position to be in. And the best way that I can let you know what some of my feelings are is to recount a story to you about this old man who was billed as the 88-year-old grandfather who would climb up to a 350-foot ladder, step on a little platform, and dive into a barrel of water. And everybody was sitting around, and he came up, tottered up to his microphones, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am billed as the 80-so-and-so-year-old Zadie who will climb up 350 feet to a platform and jump down into a little puddle of water. Now tell me, children, do you want me, maybe so-so, to go up there and dive into the platform and everybody yell, no, no, no?" And he says, "Thank you very much, Miss Children. The next performance will be at 3:15. So here I find myself on a platform with some very, very wonderful speakers, a great scholarly, sensitive author who has completed a work that I consider to be art, sensitive, very scholarly certainly, and very, very factual. Howard has taken words and he's woven it into a bouquet of flowers that presented as a story of life which he has investigated in this community, and has come up with some very succinct and some very, very real observations. I also remember something that Howard once edited a book called Change. And that book was something that he wrote some years back. You remember, Howard, when you edited that book and had these people write? And there was one author that said that a perception evolves of the sum total of a person's life experience. And that, as Rita pointed out, each individual, regardless of what resiliency they had, regardless of how they perceive things, perceive it in a very different way. And what is really the message that comes through is that there is no such a thing as an immaculate perception, that you really don't know for sure what you're seeing and what you're feeling and what is the evidence. I think that my experiences at the home were somewhat different. But they were different not in the sense that I want to make declamations against it as a life experience. What I'm trying to bring into acknowledgement, to recognition, is that it is benevolently structured as an organization like the Jewish Children's Home could be, that there are areas which need fundamental change, need recognition of what our intrinsic needs are for the development of children, young adults. I think what we have to recognize, and I want to go back to what the challenge is tonight, are orphanages a thing of history? And my answer is no, they are not. They are a thing for posterity. The only thing that I would want changed is the word orphanage. That should be retired permanently. And I would be an advocate for group homes, perhaps smaller. And there are many reasons for it. The judge recounted what he has to face daily in terms of kids becoming damaged over and over again. We are having, at this time in the history of our society, something like 420,000 children who just run away from home. Some go onto the streets, they sell drugs, they get into the use of the drugs, they walk the streets as prostitutes, both boys and girls. They are almost ready to be lost to society as total victims. And we must have another recourse to providing for them. We don't even begin to talk about just the homes that are shattered and replacement need, but I'm talking about the kids that are the runaways, who never return. I would say that what we really need, small group homes with a wonderful clinical staff that's really dedicated, that's caring in terms of what they see necessary for each child's healthy development. I would advocate that beside the clinical team, that the selection of the individuals who stand in dominion over the running of such a group home be an applicant that shows qualifications and good educational background, certainly some clinical understanding, presiding over a staff that provides warmth and love and caring, assessing the strengths and the vulnerability of the charges. Where do we strengthen them? How do we bolster them? What do we do for their self-concept? What do we do for their personal empowerment, self-empowerment? What do we do in terms of giving them the skills to be able to dilute negative experiences, the things that depotentiate them as human beings, the things that have invalidated them as human beings? Their susceptibility, for example, to anger when they start to interject the feelings of failure. These are the things that what I would like to see in the future development of the organization that's cared for. There are a number of things which I want to comment on in terms of what helped to sustain us. Yes, there was resiliency, but that also varied in degree, and to what extent, for example, were the emotional resources of the youngster of being exhausted in an attempt to try to make an adaptation. I have to think then, to use the word Yiddishkeit, of the people, our people, who have been among the most oppressed people in the world and have come to each other's aid over the years to try to help each one gain a good foothold, to get some strength, to get some emotional strength. And I have to turn towards the Mothers Club, a shining example of some of the sweetest Yiddishkeit that anybody could ever hope to see. And I remember Mrs. Coco and all of those other wonderful mothers who found time in their very busy lives to provide an experience between us, between the Mothers Club and the children of the home. And they were very precious and very, very sweet, especially the lady that tapped Willie on the head and would say, "Tatale," because that's what Willie always was, one of the sweetest kids that ever came into this world, and who has remained as a fixture, a person caring and giving for year after year. The Big Brothers and Sisters Club, yes, we had role models there. And they came and they spent time with us. And that was a sustaining experience. And there were other groups in the community that came. There was the Minutemen, a fellow by the name of Goldstein. There was a group that formed in order to perpetuate his name. He was killed on the streets of Rochester by an automobile. This kept coming. This was our warmth. This was our inheritance, our kind of goodness, our kind of loving and caring for each other, the Yiddishkeit that was there. This is what I want to see. This is what I would hope for any kid that eventually has to be placed, right, who needs a home, who needs a haven, that he will know that despite sometimes, let's say this, there were times when life was a frozen ice field for me. Living there, particularly during the time when I was there, when I had become, something of a fighter, because that's what you needed to survive at one time. I mean, the first hour that I was there, it was like a kind of a regular thing. That somebody said, well, you're a new kid, you have to fight him. I was 7 years old, and I had a kind of a fight with a kid that I never knew what I might have liked. And I got my head split open because he took a roundhouse and he caught me on the side of the head, and I was really beating him. But he caught me on the side of the head, and I lost my balance, and I struck a mandible when I opened up my head. And Jake Hound came by and said, "What's that?" I said, "I hit my head on the baseboard playing baseball." You could squeal in those days. There were lots of times when life was lonely. I'm not going to say that the trip was a good one, because there were times when you really wondered if there was anybody that really cared. But it was always a Mothers Club. There was always a Big Brothers and Sisters Club. There were these other organizations who came and lent us some support, who gave us for a time a reprieve from the feeling that we could step out of lockstep and fight off complete compliance because you felt as if you were being smothered or you were being put in an emotional straitjacket. There were a lot of wonderful things at the home. We have an interaction, we raised us. How many have really remained friends? Well, I have remained friends at a distance. I know Stan and Ellison well, and certainly there was always Willie. And then there were other guys that I see here and there. And my work is on the staff of the Jewish Community Center and the JY camp, which incidentally was another wonderful thing that the Mothers Club or the Big Brothers and Sisters Club provided for us, camperships for 2 weeks, where I met wonderful people, counselors who generated motivation in us to become somebody. And I'm going to have to say this now because until the day that my brain stops sending messages, I have to bring up the name of one of the most wonderful human beings that I ever met in my life. His name was Manny Hirsch. He was the director of health education. He was a camp director. He was a wonderful athlete. But the thing about Manny was more poignant than anything else is that he would see someone who needed help, and he would reach out to pull them to their feet and to give them a feeling that they were somebody. And he just didn't do it with our Jewish kids. He went down to Baden Street. It was Manny Hirsch who inspired in me a desire to want to be a person involved in service to other people. We have now a little plaque for Manny. If you ever go by it, show him a kiss. He'll kiss you back.
Well, now, folks, it's your turn, and I think we've heard some very stimulating thoughts on the part of each of our speakers, and some of them may have provoked some questions or comments. We have a microphone down here at the front, and unless you think you can be heard from there, I'll try and hear the questions and restate them if they require it. So, does someone want to start off? Yes, sir.
What was the average population of the home?
The average population of the home over the period of its life?
It ranged between somewhere between 45 and 70 at any one period of time. About 300 children went through over the 1914 to 1947.
Judge Miller raised a question during his remarks about the size of homes. Do you think it would make a material difference if in your experience, if there had been the group homes as we're familiar with them today that had a much lower population?
You're asking? Yeah.
Well, we've got the experts.
My reaction to this is that I would advocate a smaller group home. I became involved with the opening of a group home for the Association for the Retired, the first one that they ever opened when we started to, empty out some of the warehouses where they were and to bring them into a normal situation. We had a house mother and a house father, and I was a consultant to them in terms of helping the retired citizens make an adjustment in the home. And we were able to deal with each one a lot more intensely and to get involved in working with the problems that they sometimes manifested. And so I'm going to remain resolute in my own mind about the efficacy of a smaller group home.
How small?
Well, I would say 15, 18.
Under 20?
Under 20, yeah. This is the one where we seem to have had the most effectiveness, most
In
successful.
lieu of that, what about a cottage plan?
Well, how big a cottage?
Well, 7, 8, 10 kids.
Fine.
I mean, that you would have
That answers to the description that I said is
you would have
right.
an institution of 100 or 200 or 300 children.
Well, that might,
But they're living in cottages.
providing that the service is well established and that it isn't a question of another warehouse and having little cells here and there.
Do we have some more questions? Yes.
I'd just like to make a few comments. I'm more than confident. I grew up.
Do you want to step up to the microphone?
I grew up with the children in the home. I went to school with them, played ball with them, and went in the Army with them. I'd just like to make one comment that Phil started. Phil said that the children went to the JY camp and under Manny Hirsch. It was a wonderful feeling. The boys went for 2 weeks, the girls went for 2 weeks. And speaking about the JY camp, that was a great help to them. Then there were other people at the JY camp that were very, very, very helpful to the children in the home. And one of those, Bellows Snyder. Bellows Snyder saw to it that there was a basketball court and a nice tennis court that was built at the children's home. How Bello used to come to the children's home and play basketball with us and taught us how to play basketball. And speaking of basketball, through the Big Brothers and Sisters Club, they formed the BB's basketball team. And the BB stood for Big Brothers and Sisters Club. They provided the uniforms, and I must say, the BBs were an outstanding high school basketball team at the JY in the league. One of the years they won a championship, and then they later went on to the senior league. I was a little bit younger, and then I played basketball, and we had a team for the younger children in the home. Abe Jacobson was on the team. He was our star player. He was very fast, although he was very small. And we of the Eagles also had people from the Monroe, that went to Monroe High and Franklin High, where we went. Some of the players on our team were junior varsity players at Monroe High that later became stars at Monroe High. I played junior varsity too. And we won the high school B-League championship one year. So through the efforts of people like Bello Snyder, who saw that we had the opportunity of going to the JY and playing basketball, the kids did very well. I'd like to bring one other important point out. During World War II, we had 56 children, men and women, that served in the United States Armed Forces, and how well those children did in the service. Unfortunately, we had one person that was killed in action, Max Weinstein. At the same time, we also had people like Izzy Jacobson, who had one of the greatest war records. He was a war hero during World War II. He received citations from General de Gaulle. He got the New York State Conspicuous Cross. He got so many medals. He had one of the greatest records of anyone in World War II. And he was honored also at Beth Shalom, in which there were over 400 people that paid respect to him and his great accomplishments in the service, children from the home, other veterans that served. And I just want you to know, in my job, I worked at the Monroe County Veterans Service Agency. I was the director. And I have, I must say one thing. There were so many children from the home that had outstanding records in the service. And that could have been from the discipline that they had. They were such good soldiers. I know because I've taken care of so many veterans in Monroe County, Jew and non-Jew, and there were so many children from the home that when I saw their records, Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart, letters of commendation, outstanding records compared to anyone. I just want to bring these few points out. And unfortunately, through the years, we've lost children that have passed away that were in the home. And that was always hard for me to take care of anyone that had to come in that passed away too, because of the various benefits. But I just wanted to say that I'm so proud tonight to see so many of the former children and how well they did in life, in all types of fields, teachers, social workers, business people, very successful, all types of life that they've given to the Jewish community here in Rochester. Sure, and let me say another thing. They may have had a very much of a religious bringing up. Look, we had the choir in the home. I sang in the choir in the home, but the holidays were so beautiful. Pesach, how children from the alumni came back to spend the time at Pesach, or sukkahs, how they had the largest sukkah of any place in the city, but how they were brought up in a nice atmosphere. I just want to bring these few points up. Thank you for giving me the courtesy.
Sure.
And Howard, thank you so much for writing such a beautiful book.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate your augmenting the program here tonight, and it will be a further inducement to read the book so we can all learn more about what you whetted our appetite about. Are there some questions or other comments? Yes?
Speak up.
Yeah, there's a microphone right in front.
The topic of tonight was, should orphanages be a part of history, as I recall? And Michael did begin to address that in talking about some of the people he sees, so I'm directing my question at him. Yes, I agree with you, we have a lot of problems today with children of drug addicts or parents who just don't care about their kids. But when one thinks about Gorham Street, it's a lot more than a building where you put kids who need a place to live. And even you touched upon that in talking about the Yiddishkeit and the sense of community and taking care of one's own. And could we, in fact, replicate that with a group of kids who just need a caring environment?
It's a good question. And my thesis was that, and I agree, orphanages is not a good word, but the group home concept of care for children should not just be cast aside. We only have a few options. We have trying to reunify the family, which, as I say, in many cases has just been a total failure. We have foster care, which doesn't give the child any sense of permanency. And although there are wonderful people out there who are providing foster care, there are an equal number of horror stories about people who have come through foster care. And there's the one that has been rejected, which is mostly the group home, cottage-type facility. You're not going to duplicate the care, the concern that the Jewish community had for its children with the children that I see in my court. I mean, I'm not being chauvinistic about it, but it just doesn't exist. But we can, with some good clinical help, with some services to a group home type setting, I think provide an alternative. I mean, what I do in family court is I don't deal with best options. We don't have many. I deal with least objectionable alternatives, the LOAs. And this would be a least objectionable alternative for a lot of the kids who come through my court.
Can I add?
Sure.
In point of fact, what we're talking about that should be is there's a huge professional group that provides residential care for all kinds of children. They have their own journals, they have their own publications. There is a place very much like the home up in Maine where we are called the Goodwill Hinkley Home that has the toughest kids, 12 to 18 years old. You picture a tougher group of kids who have been through every kind of difficulty there is. And they're doing well. The idea is not that whether the home can be duplicated. The idea is that to allow each setting to develop its own culture and let that culture, just like Yiddishkeit in the home, let that culture help the kid get a sense of identity and a sense of belonging. There is a movement that should take over here, it's beginning to, that has a peculiar name called social pedagogy, which is in Europe, where there are many, many, many institutions that are run, and where children are not psychologized, they're not treated as such. They're helped to become mentioned, they're helped to become civilians, they're helped to become suitable human beings. And there's now an exchange going on between the European group and some of the universities here. And it's very accepted. These people come over here and say, what's wrong with you people? Why are you getting so upset about institutions, about group home? Look at the kibbutz. and many other examples. So this is not some far-fetched idea that we ought to do it. It's there. It's going on. They're great homes.
I think we'll take one more question, and then I think we'll gather in smaller groups, and our author and panelists have agreed to be with us, and I think it will make more sense. Yes?
Yes, I just wanted to say one thing. As a retired Monroe County social services caseworker of 18 years in foster care and adoption, and I commend Judge Miller for his work and his comments. There are a couple of things that I think we could think about. One would be if we could do something to change this law that he mentioned about the length of diligent effort to return a child to a dysfunctional family. And the other would be to kind of not to forget about the option of adoption, which provides permanency for a child. However, if we wait until the child gets older and that child comes before Judge Miller in his courtroom and has to be sent to a residential home, then I'm afraid to say that it's too late. And I want to agree with Hillary Clinton's book and her effort about it takes a village. I think the Jewish community can be proud for what they did, but that philosophy needs to be exported outward.
Will, did you want to say something?
How do we get an autographed copy in Howard's book?
That's the best question, and I can help answer that. What you're going to have in a few minutes is a chance to have some refreshments, and there'll be copies of the book available for purchase, and you'll have a chance you can negotiate with the author to perhaps autograph some of those books. And I want to, first before we break up, I want to thank a small number of people. The organizations that are listed on the flyer. This would not have been possible without the help from the Foundation for the Jewish Community, and I want to thank Lois DeCosta and the leadership of the foundation. The Jewish Family Service, and we've had a very close working relationship with them for years in terms of the scholarship grants and loans which we've made over many, many years. I'm glad Barry Stein is here tonight, and we thank him and his very capable staff, because each year this board does meet, and we do hand out scholarships that complement what the Jewish Family Service does, and it's very important, and it's a fine legacy for the Jewish Children's Home. And I also would like to thank Randy Morgenstern and the JCC, and in particular the JCC Book Festival, and I hope you'll each read what she's handed out. And I would like to thank the JCC, and I want to thank my fellow directors on the board of the Jewish Children's Home Scholarship Fund, Ted Levinson, Mort Coco, Ben Solon, Will Greenberg, and of course Barry Stein. And thank you very much for coming this evening.
Oh, say that again about Phil. He's great. Say some more. Say some more. What else? Go ahead. He ought to make a living at it. He did. That's a problem. Did they give him any? No. They should have. Very good. Old folk. Hey. Close to home.
Yeah, very close to home.
All right. Good to see you. What do you think about these remarks that were made?
I think it's very good.
Did you read the book?
Yes, I got it right here.
Yeah. And?
I even have a copy of Picture of Jake Jaffe.
Is that right?
When he...
Is Jake here?
I don't know. I looked around for him.
I haven't seen him. This is Morris Isaacson.
Yeah, and here's my best friend, Jake Jaffe. From the time we were babies in the baby cottage until now, we're still friends. Very close friends.
How about that?
This is my cousin.
Yeah. Famous lady.
She didn't recognize me.
You did? I recognized her right away.
I'm going to tell her who I was. Right. So how about that? Yeah.
Let him sign.
Part of the
Wait a minute, who is this that you're talking to?
Who's going to take your picture?
I don't want to take my
Somebody
picture.
should take your picture.
Who is this lady is what I want to know. Who is this lady?
C.O. Meislin. C.O. Meislin. Right?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
And how do you know him?
Cousins through marriage.
Through marriage?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here's a very well-known Rochester character, and he is a character.
He is a character, I agree.
Would you like to have this in the foot picture?
No, not exactly.
You got it.
In the Bateson, yes. That's where it'll do the least damage.
How was that, sir?
It'll do the least damage.
No problem there.
All right.
I understand your wife left you.
He did what?
I hope you're
And here is the author himself. The lineup. And here's somebody who bought more. So how many books did you buy?
Only 3.
Only 3. And you want to identify yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jack Copeland. I'm one of Holly Goldstein's older friends. We grew up together.
Wait a minute, you lived on Grant Street.
No, I was on Martin Street.
On Martin Street.
That was about 200 years ago. Come next Thursday.
Wait a minute.
My brother.
This is your brother. You lived on Martin Street?
That's right.
Now, wait a minute. Who was the Cole that lived on Grant Street?
No. The Powells lived on Grant Street.
Ah.
We lived on Martin Street.
Yeah. Well, did he know the Novies?
Yeah.
Did he know Sylvia and Agnes? They lived on Grant Street. Originally,
I remember the name.
but you're not that old.
I'm not, huh?
No.
I mean, you're older than Howard, so that's all.
All right. So you're 2 years younger than I am. So you're not old.
You are?
Aaron Braveman.
Jack.
Go ahead. What is the anecdote? First of all, your name again.
My name is Ethel Spring Winters. Mr. Hollander used to call my father very irritantly because they both were very involved in philanthropic things and things that were Jewish. And Mr. Hollander would say, "Is Mr. Spring there?" And I would say, "Oh, yes, certainly, Mr. Hollander." And then he would say, "How did you know it was me?" And remember, Mr. Hollander, you cannot ever...
Mr. Hollander used to teach English at the U of R.
Really?
Broken English.
So he was always very amazed that I knew his voice and very flattered.
Yes. Something about
Thank you. I'll tell them.
whatever it is that you thought about tonight's program, or
It makes me very sad to see all our young people in turmoil. I mean,
to see what?
all our young people in turmoil. I'm just talking to Joni and
Yeah.
the judge, and something has to be done.
It has to be done.
Unfortunately, the most politicians don't have a clue. That's the big thing.
Well, as I said,
They do what's popular.
I think 75% of the people here don't have a clue. I looked around and I said 75% of these people do not have a clue of what's going on unless you're hands-on and you're in touch with the people. I mean, there's social workers here and the judge and people that know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Politicians are,
Yeah.
I don't know.
She said, I cried. I said, why did you cry? She said, because in that home, I mean, you can talk about what you mean. But to talk
Do you want to repeat your name, please?
Esther Cohen.
And it used to be Esther Schreiber?
Esther Schreiber Cohen.
Esther Schreiber Cohen. And you knew Lil then?
From the hall.
Is that right?
Yes.
I don't want to ask who's older. That's not polite.
So she knew my brother.
What's that?
She knew Stanley.
She knew Stanley?
Have a good show.
Oh, yeah.
Bye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This is my daughter.
This is our daughter, Joan. She's a wise guy. Are you Izzy?
Izzy died. I'm his brother Abe, Jake.
Oh, you're Abe.
Your name?
I'm Aaron Braveman.
Braverman.
I'm married to Lil Goldblatt.
Were you Lil the Stanley Harold?
That's right.
Harold died too, didn't he?
And so did Stanley.
You weren't related to Braverman that had that their
No, that was George.
that they had that their warehouse on Hanover
That's
Street?
Braverman.
Yeah.
Mine is Braveman.
Oh, Bravema.
Right.
Yeah. Are you from Rochester?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My father had a junk shop on Herman Street.
On Herman Street. My father was a shaykhit on Baden.
Is that right?
I'm not on Baden. We lived on Baden, but we were situated.
What do you think about this program tonight?
It was very good, yeah. Well, he wrote a lot about my brother in the book too, yeah. And I wasn't home for about 3 years.
Yeah, but Izzy.
Yeah, Izzy.
Yeah, I knew Izzy.
Yeah. Well, you know, he was a hell of a guy, wasn't he?
Boy, he had guts, I guess. Huh?
He had, that's for sure. My mother used to say, "You're not strong as Izzy."
Very good. Well, just tell us who you are. So,
My name is Herb Goldstein, and I'm Howard Goldstein's older brother, and I can't make any claims of having anything to do with his natural fame.
yeah. But have you published also, or?
Yes, but not anything. Different field entirely.
That's all. Yeah. Clinical.
But
was all clinical?
pardon?
Clinical.
More nearly educational.
Oh.
Yeah. My interest was in how retarded kids learn, and so
Were you working when computers came in?
Yes, I was. I was at the University of Illinois when the first major computer was invented. Iliac.
Yeah.
It was marvelous.
Now, did you ever use it?
Did I ever use it?
To apply to educating children?
Oh, sure.
Retarded children?
Yes. Do it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Computers are used tremendous.
Well, thank you. Well, I think we will end. Oh, well, look at this. Isn't that great?
Thank you.
These are co-conspirators. The co-conspirators, Will and Phil. The co-conspirators.
Wait a minute.